Imagine an animal that lays eggs like a reptile, feeds its babies milk like a mammal, hunts with its eyes, ears, and nose all shut, senses the electric crackle of a living body through a rubbery bill, carries enough venom in its heel to leave a grown man screaming for weeks, and glows blue-green in the dark under ultraviolet light. Now imagine you are told this is not a monster from a story, not a creature stitched together in a lab, but a real, warm, furry animal paddling around a quiet river in eastern Australia right now, tonight. If you had never heard of it, you would swear someone was lying to you. When the first preserved specimen reached British scientists in the late 1700s, that is exactly what they thought. They looked at the flat, duck-like bill on the front of a soft brown mammal's body, and they were certain it was a hoax, a joke, a duck's beak sewn onto the skin of a beaver by some clever hoaxer in Asia. One naturalist reportedly took a pair of scissors to the pelt, searching for the stitches where the fraud had been assembled. There were no stitches. The animal was real, and has been quietly breaking the rules ever since. This is the platypus, and by the end, you will understand why this single small creature forced scientists to rewrite what they thought they knew about what a mammal even is, and why calling it a mistake gets the story exactly backwards. Let's start with the rule it breaks first and hardest. Every school textbook tells you the same thing about mammals. Mammals have fur or hair. Mammals are warm-blooded, and mammals give birth to live young. The platypus has fur. The platypus is warm-blooded, and the platypus lays eggs. Small, soft, leathery eggs, closer to a snake's or a lizard's than to a bird's hard shell. The female curls around them in a burrow dug deep into a riverbank and incubates them against her belly for about 10 days until they hatch. This makes the platypus a member of a tiny, ancient group of mammals called monotremes. Alongside its cousins, the echidnas, it is one of the only egg-laying mammals left alive on the entire planet. Everything else, from mice to whales to you, belongs to lineages that gave up eggs long ago. The platypus never did. It kept the egg the way its distant ancestors did hundreds of millions of years ago, and simply carried that habit forward into the modern world. So it is a mammal that still does the one thing we are taught mammals stop doing. But laying the egg is only the beginning of the strangeness, because once the tiny, blind, jelly bean-sized babies hatch, the mother has to feed them milk, and here the platypus breaks a second rule in a way that sounds almost impossible. It has no nipples, not a single one. Female mammals everywhere else channel milk through teats, but the platypus never evolved them. Instead, the milk simply seeps out through patches of skin on the mother's belly, oozing through tiny pores the way sweat comes through your skin. It pools in shallow grooves in her fur, and the babies press in and lap it up straight from the surface of her body. It is milk, real mammalian milk, rich and nourishing, but delivered in the most primitive way imaginable, a leftover from an age before nipples existed. And there is a strange side effect to this open, exposed way of feeding. Because the milk sits out on the skin instead of flowing through a sealed teat, it is more exposed to bacteria, and scientists have found that platypus milk contains an unusual, powerful antibacterial protein to protect the young from infection. Researchers have even nicknamed it after the animal, and they are studying it as a possible weapon against the drug-resistant superbugs that threaten human medicine. The creature the old scientists laughed at may be hiding an answer to one of our most modern problems. Now let's go underwater, because this is where the platypus stops being merely odd and starts being genuinely astonishing. Watch a platypus dive to feed, and the first thing you notice is what it does with its own head. It shuts down. When it slips beneath the surface, it closes its eyes. It closes its ears. It seals its nostrils shut. For the length of the dive, it is effectively blind, deaf, and unable to smell. It hunts in the murky, muddy water of the riverbed with all three of the senses you would rely on switched completely off. And yet in the dark, with its eyes closed, It finds and catches fast-moving prey, worms and insect larvae and shrimp, with deadly accuracy. How? The answer is in that famous bill. It is not the hard, dead beak of a duck. It is soft, rubbery, and packed with tens of thousands of specialized sensors. Some of them feel touch and pressure, sensing the tiny currents stirred up by moving prey. But the others do something almost science fiction. They detect electricity. Every time a living animal moves a muscle, it gives off a faint electrical signal. A shrimp flicking its tail, a worm twitching in the mud, all of it leaks a tiny electric field into the water. The platypus's bill is covered in electroreceptors that can pick up those minuscule fields. So down there in the blackness, the platypus is not really swimming blind at all. It is reading a living electrical map of everything moving around it, sweeping its bill back and forth to triangulate the exact position of a heartbeat's worth of muscle in the dark. It even seems to compare the timing between the electric signal and the pressure wave that follows to judge exactly how far away its target is. It is one of the only mammals on Earth that hunts this way. It essentially has a sixth sense, and it trusts that sense so completely that it is willing to throw away its eyes, ears, and nose every single time it eats. Now, you might already be thinking this animal has collected enough strange features for a dozen creatures. We are not close to finished, because the male platypus is also venomous. Look at the hind legs of a male, and you will find a sharp, curved spur on the inside of each ankle. That spur is connected to a gland that swells with venom, especially during the breeding season when males fight over territory and mates. If a male drives that spur into a rival, or into a predator, or into a human hand, it delivers a dose of venom that is genuinely serious. It will not usually kill a healthy adult person, but the pain is described as excruciating, far beyond an ordinary sting, and it can last not for minutes or hours, but for days and even weeks, and ordinary painkillers barely touch it. In smaller animals, like a dog, the venom can be lethal. This makes the platypus one of the very few venomous mammals in existence, and almost the only one that delivers its venom with a built-in spur like a snake's fang mounted on its heel. And here is the beautiful, maddening detail. That venom is not related to snake venom by inheritance. It evolved separately from completely different starting genes, and yet it ended up attacking the body in strikingly similar ways, a case of nature arriving at the same brutal solution twice. So step back and look at what we have. A warm, furry animal that lays reptile-like eggs, that sweats milk with no nipples, that hunts by electricity with its senses sealed shut, that carries venom in its heel like a snake. It is as if someone took parts from a reptile, a bird, and a mammal and assembled them into a single working creature. And that is not just a poetic description. It is close to literally what the biology shows. Scientists call it a mosaic. The way a platypus walks is a clue. Its legs stick out to the sides, sprawling like a lizard's or a crocodile's, rather than being tucked neatly underneath its body the way a dog's or a cat's are. When it walks on land, it waddles with that ancient reptilian gait. Its shoulder and chest bones carry features that look far more like those of early reptile-like ancestors than like a modern mammal's. And then there is the genome itself. When researchers finally read the platypus's full genetic code, they found something that looked less like a single clean blueprint and more like 3 different animals bound into one book. There were genes clearly shared with mammals for milk and for fur. There were genes tied to egg-laying that we associate with birds and reptiles. There were genes for the electric sense and genes for the venom. Reptile, bird, and mammal, all written into the same creature. And the way the platypus handles sex is stranger still. You have 2 sex chromosomes, an X and a Y. So do almost all mammals. The platypus has 10, 5 pairs, a whole chain of sex chromosomes that link together and sort themselves out during reproduction in a way found in no other mammal on the planet. And some of those chromosomes look surprisingly similar to the system birds use rather than the one mammals use. It is a completely different way of building a male and a female, hiding inside an animal that already refused to follow any of the other rules. Think about what that means. The single most basic decision a body makes, whether to grow into a male or a female, is handled in the platypus by a machine so unusual that no other mammal shares it, and one that carries the fingerprints of a much older, bird-like way of doing things. Even the platypus's teeth tell a story of deep time. Adults have none. The young grow tiny teeth and then lose them, replacing them with hard, horny, grinding pads. So an adult platypus mashes its food between plates in its bill and stores it in cheek pouches to chew at the surface. Another small, ancient improvisation stacked on top of all the others. And just when you think the platypus has run out of surprises, it does one more thing, almost as a private joke. Shine an ultraviolet light on a platypus in the dark, and its fur glows. Under normal light, its coat is a plain, dull brown. But under UV, that same fur lights up in a soft, ghostly blue-green, a property called biofluorescence. It was discovered almost by accident when scientists shone UV light on museum specimens and were stunned to see them shimmer. We still do not fully understand why. It may help platypuses recognize each other in the low light of dawn and dusk when they are most active. It may help them stay hidden from predators that can see ultraviolet. Or it may be a leftover trait with no purpose at all. For now it stands as one more open question wrapped around an animal that seems to be made entirely of open questions. So by every measure, the platypus looks like a creature that should not exist, a jumble of mismatched parts that has no business swimming in a real river. Which brings us to the most important question of all. If it breaks so many rules, is the platypus simply a failure, an evolutionary dead end that survival somehow forgot to erase? The answer is a firm and fascinating no, and understanding why changes everything about how you should see it. The platypus is not primitive in the sense of being poorly made. It is ancient in the sense of being a survivor. Its lineage split away from the rest of the mammals extraordinarily early, well over 100 million years ago, back when the ancestors of every other living mammal were still tiny shadows scurrying under the feet of dinosaurs. While the rest of the mammal family tree branched and changed and reinvented itself over and over, the monotreme line held on to a set of very old features, the egg, the sprawling walk, the strange genetics, and kept refining them instead of throwing them away. So those reptile-like traits are not clumsy mistakes. They are direct glimpses of what the earliest mammals were actually like, preserved in a living, breathing animal you could watch from a riverbank today. And far from being helpless, the platypus is a superbly tuned specialist. Every strange feature is a precise tool for its exact way of life. The electric sense makes it a lethal night hunter in muddy water where eyes are useless. The dense waterproof fur keeps it warm in cold rivers. The webbed feet and flat tail make it a powerful swimmer, and the venomous spur gives the males a serious weapon in the fight to breed. This is not an animal that barely scraped through. It is an animal that found a brilliant, weird solution and stuck with it for tens of millions of years, right up to this very night. But here is the quiet, sobering truth hidden at the end of all this wonder. This magnificent living fossil, this survivor of the age of dinosaurs, is now facing threats it has no ancient trick to solve. Platypuses live only in the rivers and streams of eastern Australia, and those waterways are under growing pressure from drought, from habitat loss, from dams that cut their rivers into pieces, and from the debris and litter that can snag and trap them. An animal that survived meteor strikes and ice ages and the rise and fall of entire families of mammals is now quietly vanishing from stretches of river where it once thrived. And much of it is happening out of sight, in the dark, in the water, exactly where the platypus has always hidden. So the next time you hear the platypus described as a mistake or a joke or an animal that makes no sense, remember what it really is. It is one of the oldest continuous experiments in what it means to be a mammal, a creature that answers the question of what came before us not with a fossil in a drawer, but with a beating heart and glowing fur, still swimming, still hunting by electricity in the dark. It does not make no sense. It makes a different, older kind of sense than we do. One written long before our branch of the family was even a whisper. So here is what we want to know from you. Of all its impossible tricks, which one amazed you the most? The eggs, the milk that sweats through skin, the venom in its heel, the electric sixth sense, or the fur that secretly glows? Tell us in the comments. And if this changed the way you see the strangest animal in the world, stay with us. Because the natural world is full of impossible things that turn out, on closer inspection, to be beautifully, stubbornly true.